धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मा अमृतङ्गमय। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। Before we actually start the program, I would like to just make a small announcement that we'll have a break between 10:35 and 10:50 for 15 minutes because I'm supposed to do some exercise. So I'll be taking a small break and we'll join exactly at 10:50 and then go on up to 11:30. So we will compensate our 1 hour 10 minutes or 1 hour 15 minutes program after a gap between 10:35 and 10:50. I need to be away for about 15 minutes.
So
I-
we can
yeah.
keep connected and we can
Yes.
be connected and play some music, no, sir?
Yeah. Please.
Okay,
Let them be
okay.
connected and you can play the music, no problem.
Yeah, and
Okay.
Beena madam can do some meditation for them.
Yeah. That would be nice if you can engage them for 15 minutes, nothing like it. Okay. Thank you so much, Ravi. So I'll start sharing the screen. Are you able to see the screen? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, we can.
Yes.
Okay. Fine.
I was saying Umesh can do the meditation
Yeah,
because
Umesh can do it. Yes,
first.
Umesh can do it.
Yeah.
Yes, he can do some pranayama and meditation also.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll be missing it because I'll be doing some other exercises. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank
Now
you.
we have completed 51 last time, 52. So we have about another 16 or 17 verses to go. As I said last time, most of these verses are glorificatory and just explaining some of the factors related to what a truly realized person would be like and what he would be doing, and how to know that you are in that state. Now, here, let me reduce the fan. Yeah, thank you. Continuing to talk about a person who is a realized person, who is in a state of consciousness which is in oneness with the Brahman. He says, Upadhisthopi tad dharmair alipto vyomavan munihi sarvavin mudhavat tishted asakto vayuvaccharet. Though associated with upadhis, he, the contemplative one, is undefiled by their traits, like the sky, and he remains unaltered under all conditions like a dumb person. He moves about unattached like the wind. Upadhisthopi, that means though he is in the upadhis, that means he has got this set of bodies and koshas and everything. Even then, tad dharmair aliptaha, he is not smeared or he is unattached to the dharmas of those bodies. See, the bodies, when they are there, they have their own functioning, their own aspects related to it, and also the karma associated with those bodies. You can't take it away, you can't just throw it away just like that. neither the body nor the karma attached to it. It has to undergo its own natural and normal process and exhaust itself. So the dharmas, that means the nature of the upadhis, will continue to be what they are, but this person is not smeared or colored or tainted or defiled by any of these upadhis. The body may do its own function. The body continues to be doing what it needs to do in spite of it, because it has got, as I said, its own dharma and its own karma also associated with it. So he is totally unattached. And the example, beautiful example again given is Vyomavat, like the sky. We have discussed this elaborately about the nature of the sky, where everything is there, but nothing can touch the sky. Because the sky is not a thing as such. It is not something outside there. It is the expanse of space from a physical point of view and expanse of consciousness from a spiritual or transcendental point of view. And that too, we know from a physical, definition of it, space is recognizable only when there are objects in it. You can't recognize space by itself. Only when you have two objects, this gap in between those two, the emptiness in between those two objects, is what you normally refer to as space. That's the reason why the Einsteinian model or the theory says that both space and time are relative. Unless somebody is there to recognize it or some object is there to identify it, there is nothing like absolute space or absolute time from the physical point of view also. So what is there from a transcendental point of view is the vast expanse of consciousness. And consciousness is not a thing. It's not something tangible. So he compares to the person as such to sky, where he is unattached to anything. Though his body is there, body has got certain physical tendencies, for certain, all kinds of limitations associated with that body. They are all there. But he is unattached. Nothing of those bodies truly attaches to him, who is in that state of consciousness, and he refers to him as Muni. Muni means Maunat Munihi. Muni means one who is contemplative, one who is silent, one who is constantly in a state of contemplation. So such a person is called as a Muni. There are both the terms, Mananat Munihi, Maunat Munihi. Manana means a contemplation, Mauna means silence. Silence and contemplation are the two markers or indicators of a true Muni, of a person who is a true saint, or one who is in a state of consciousness in which contemplation on that ultimate reality through silence is something natural. So
now at least pandemic has given us the opportunity for silence and contemplation.
Yes, that is true. Very, very much true. So actually, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. We are not going out anywhere. We need not continuously chatter and talk to people on phone or video chatting or anything. And how long can you talk to your own people at your house? As somebody said, within 10-15 minutes, there will be a quarrel. If you go beyond 10-15 minutes, there will be a quarrel. So it's silence is the best thing. Silence, keeping to yourself, is that. So even though he has an upadhi and he is functioning through those upadhis, he is not smeared or tainted or defiled by the dharmas or the traits or the natural tendencies of those upadhis, like the sky. The second one is much more interesting. He has used such beautiful terms here. He says, Sarvavit Mudhavat Tishthet Asaktaha. He is Sarvavit. That means he knows everything. He is aware of everything, but Mudhavat Tishthet. He remains like a dumb fellow. Dumb is not necessarily one who can't speak. You call somebody as dumb or dull-witted or who is unresponsive. And asaktaha, again, he has no interest in anything. Being a person who is all aware and awake, he still appears like a dumb fellow, a fellow who is foolish because he doesn't respond to anything and is not interested in anything, and he moves unattached like the wind. Vayuvat charet. He moves about in a totally detached manner, and he has no particular direction or destination in which he is moving. This is a very strange trait of some yogis, and some yogis who have, actually fallen from their or gone astray from their true path. The Bhagavad Gita refers to them as yoga bhrashtas. That means one who has not actually attained what he is supposed to attain in that life, or one whose conditions are such that he has gone astray, and that puts him in a state where he is mostly there and partially here and moves about like a madman, purposeless, directionless, but at the same time he is aware. He is awakened to a different dimension or quality of consciousness. This is very interesting because when I was reading this, I was reminded of a real life story which my father's friend, he used to visit our house frequently. I'm talking about 30, 40 years back. And he himself was a practitioner of some of these spiritual practices. Now, he was mentioning that he had come across a person who appears like a beggar. And he is moving aimlessly, purposelessly here and there on the streets. Now, how come such a person attracted this friend of my father was when he was passing very close to that person, he could smell, a fragrance which is totally otherworldly, out of the world. A kind of out of the world fragrance was emanating from that person. He thought it could be accidental. Some fragrance is coming from somewhere. Then he realized that it is around this person. So when he went again close to him, he could sense that fragrance, but that fellow used to drive him away. He said, okay, go away, kind of thing. But our gentleman was a very persistent man. He would not leave him. He would go wherever he went. And that man used to run away sometimes and go and sit somewhere or hide somewhere. And he used to pursue him because he found this strange perfume or fragrance, which he said that he could never ever come across such a thing anywhere in the world. He had tried all kinds of perfumes and fragrances and scents and whatnot, but he was a very experimental man. He was such a person who would always experiment with things. He himself was a homeopathic doctor also. So he was fond of these experiments, and he pursued this man for maybe several weeks. And that man used to, be surrounded by this beautiful fragrance. But for all appearance, he would be like a madman, a beggar who is going around aimlessly and purposelessly. He didn't even know what he was eating and how he was living and all, and where he was living also. After pursuing him for several weeks or something, one fine day when he wanted to go and find him again, he was not there. He couldn't find him. So there are several, such things and such strange things happening in this world, of which we have no idea at all. And as I said, this gentleman was elderly. In fact, he was maybe 1 or 2 years older than my father, and we had a lot of respect and reverence for him because of his own sadhana, and he was also a homeopathic doctor. He would narrate so many stories, such stories. One story about a yogi who would do some pranayama and become so light as to simply, elevate into the levitation, levitate into the air, and then we go up to the roof. He said he had actually seen this with his eyes. This person whom he had to persuade a lot before he allowed him into the room where he was doing this sadhana. And he would float around for about 20 minutes on the roof, like a hydrogen balloon or helium balloon or something. And after 20 minutes, he would slowly land. And sometimes it used to be like he would land somewhere or the other. He would not exactly land at the place where he started, but somewhere in that empty room, he would descend slowly. And one very peculiar thing he noticed was this gentleman, that the yogi was wearing a kurta. And when he levitates, normally what should happen? When you rise, suppose you are sitting in a particular position, the kurta will be folded. When you rise, the kurta will become straight again. But in this case, you would find that the kurta would also not fall down by gravity, but lift along with him, but rise along with him as he was levitating. And then that means he was creating a kind of aura or energy body around him, which would defy gravitation not only for the body, but also the dress and other things. The dress would also be a part of that levitating process, and it would defy gravitation, and he would simply go into the air. So I was very fond of him, because we were seeing him right from our childhood, and because of my own interest in all kinds of strange things and spiritual aspects right from childhood, he used to narrate these stories to me. How,
This is true.
yeah, how, and he would not leave. He was such a adamant person. He said, I took months and months to persuade that yogi to allow him to sit in that room in which he was doing the sadhana. Otherwise, that person would not allow anybody, would simply close the door, do his sadhana, and he himself was not aware of the levitation actually. He may be, in some form, he may be knowing it, but Svedana, Kampana, Utthana, all these things are mentioned in the scriptures also. Svedana is, once you do some yogic pranayam practices, you start sweating profusely. Then that is called Svedana. Then Kampana, that means the body starts trembling. There will be shivers and shaking of the body. Sometimes the shaking is very vigorous also. Then finally, it is this Utthana. Utthana is rising above into the air, defying gravity. Why I am mentioning these stories is because when I was reading this, I was reminded of that, number one. Number two, all these people, he would very clearly mention that you would not be able to recognize them in a crowd, And you would normally think that they are dull-witted, mad, going around on the streets with no purpose, sometimes very shabby also, with all grown hair and beard, and their dress also being dirty, because they're not bothered about anything, totally unconcerned. The body is there, is there. In fact, for them, it was more like the body being a burden. They can't simply drop it anywhere, and therefore they are carrying on with this burden. That was the thing. So he is sarvavit, but moodhavat. He knows everything, he is aware of everything, he is totally awakened, but moodhavat, he appears like a foolish, dull-witted, dumb fellow, and unconnected and unattached to anything, not interested in, totally disinterested, totally aimless and purposeless. I am reminded of Jiddu Krishnamurti also, because way back, see, I had a lot of confusion with Jiddu Krishnamurti. He would make all kinds of strange statements, which when you are young, they appear to be so silly and foolish, or what this man is talking, what nonsense this man is talking, or kind of a thing. And that confusion used to last for a long time for me, till I started reading and reading and reading and listening to his talks, and then it started making sense. Quite early, when I was reading him in 1975 and all, when I was actually in engineering and studying, because these things can be very distractive sometimes. When you are actually very active in the world and when you are very young, if such thoughts come to you, then they could be very distracting. One such statement was, Jiddu Krishnamurti used to make a statement saying, can you lead a totally purposeless life? So it's very difficult to understand this statement, that how can anybody lead a totally purposeless life? Life has some purpose, age has some purpose, your activity, you have to be engaged in so many things, and they have to be, there has to be a definite objective, a goal, an aim, a purpose, a direction, and all these things. But he would negate all of these things and say, can you lead a totally purposeless life? The whole meaning of this statement is that purpose, motivation, object, aim, goal, all these things are mental energies or mental aspects which always seeks some kind of an end, a destination, or being something, becoming something actually, or becoming something. So the question he has posed would mean that, can you see the activities of the mind completely and how it is driven by these things? Can you be in a state where the mind is not active in any manner whatsoever? That state of mind, he was talking of that state of mind wherein there is no purpose. When we talk of purpose of life, aim of life, objective, or all these things, it is a mental construct which we are trying to establish and find some meaning in it. But why should life yield a meaning which you are searching for, or which you and me are looking for? It could have a purpose or a meaning which is totally different from that of all the human beings on this earth. We don't know. So maybe when you are not obsessed with this purpose, objective, goal, aim, reaching somewhere, attaining something, then you may actually find that it is totally different. Life may reveal itself to you, and as Jiddu Krishnamurti often used to say, it would come uninvited. That intelligence would come uninvited. So in order to prepare for that, you should ensure that this mind with its overactivity becomes silent on its own, realizing that however much it may operate, it can only operate within a limited space or a spatio-temporal framework, which is very limited. And we would be missing out on the vastness of life. The enormous dimension, the infinite dimensions of life, we will be missing on it. In fact, that's what the Yoga Shastra says. The very definition of yoga, both as a process and as a what we would call as the very purpose of all yogic processes and practices is to attain that state of Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Absolutely without any modifications in the consciousness. That's what is yoga. The very second sutra in the Yoga Sutras, anyway, the first sutra is only introductory. So the very first important practical sutra, which defines yoga both as a process and as an end in itself, as Chitta Vritti Nirodha. So you see, these dimensions become clear to us when we understand that we are functioning in ignorance and in limitation. So this particular verse is talking about that state of consciousness of a muni or a yogi or a person who is a Jivan Mukta, for whom the body is only a burden, the body is only an instrument, and that instrument being active in its own way and having a life and energy force of its own, has got its own traits and idiosyncrasies and nature. But he is unattached to it. He is not smeared by any of these things. And for all practical purposes, from an outward point of view, he may be somebody who is very ordinary, very ordinarily looking, very ordinarily dressed, and mostly appearing to be dull-witted and dumb and not responsive to most of the impinging forces of society. And he would appear as though here is a person who is absolutely aimless, purposeless, and going about here and there like the wind. That's what he is referring to in this particular sutra. Sarvavin mudhavat tishthet asakto vayuvaccharet. You see the beauty of it? So this is the state of a muni. This is the state of a Jivan Mukta, which he had referred in the earlier verses. So this dimension has to be recognized. The dimension has to be recognized in a true muni. Because it's very difficult to come across such people. It's very, very difficult unless you are very keen and then you are in search of these people and you devote your life for them. It's very difficult. And some people have spent their lives not finding also. Going about and not finding what they are looking for. It could be possible but that they are not destined to meet some people and waste a lot of their time and energy looking for it.
Sir,
Yeah.
in some of the readings, I came across this in the Puranikas. Suta Muni was one such soul.
Yeah. And he was a Suta.
Ah.
He was actually, from a worldly point of view, from a social point of view, he belonged to a very low caste or community.
Ah.
But the Puranas very clearly said that all rishis and munis, whenever they had any doubt or they needed elaboration or clarification, they would go to Suta Mahamuni.
Yeah.
You see the Puranas. In the Puranas, it is very clearly mentioned. Shaunakadi Mahamunis, they go to Suta Mahamuni.
Yeah.
Even if you have observed and carefully followed the Satyanarayana Katha, in the story that is narrated in the Satyanarayana Vrata, It is also said that Shaunakadi Mahamunis have gone to Suta and sought clarification about it and said, please elaborate on this point. How a worldly person should become prosperous, should become active in the world, and how to go about. And then he refers to it and says, you go and perform Satyavrata. Satyavrata is the vow of truth.
Okay.
Satnarayan Katha doesn't mean reciting stories and doing arti and taking prasad and going. It is to become a truthful person in life. When you become truthful in your life, prosperity comes to you. Prosperity in ways and means which are not necessarily what you are looking for. Okay? So it's already 10:34. Kindly excuse me.
You.
I request Umesh Dhagatji to take over. Just give me 10-15 minutes time. I'll be joining by 10:50 again. Okay? Thank you so much. I'll be muting myself and stopping. I am muting myself and stopping the video. Umeshji, please take over.
Sir. Bina, can we start?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So what I request is that all of us, I guess we are all sitting on a couch or a chair. So try to sit with your back upright. Keep your back absolutely upright. Do not lean back on your chair or a couch. Keep your back upright. Have your legs placed on your floor with both feet flat on the floor, forming your leg position at almost 90-degree angle. And then gently close your eyes. Close your eyes gently.
Umesh, I'll just request everybody to put their videos on so that you can see what they're doing also.
Yes, please.
Okay. Whoever would like to put their videos on, then Umesh can guide you better. Thank you.
Yes, all right. So those who like to keep their cameras on, you may do so. But never the mind, so long you could see me and hear me, that's good enough. So I suggest all of us sit with back upright. Have your eyes gently closed. Relax your body. Drop your shoulders. Have a very gentle smile on your face. And let us begin with 2 long, deep inhalation and exhalation for 5 times. So 5 rounds of deep inhalation and exhalation. Continue holding your eyes gently closed. And while your eyes are closed, try to visualize all that is surrounding you. Wherever you are seated, try to visualize all what is around you. Try to distinguish every single piece of furniture, objects, and go into details of every single objects and furniture that's around you. Try to see the size, the shape, the color, the position. Expand your awareness to visualize your surrounding. Now slowly bring your awareness to your body without eyes open. Try to visualize your sitting posture. See your own self as of you are outside your body and looking at your own self. Starting from looking at your toes, your ankle joints, your calf muscles, your knees, your hips, the body weight on your hips or thighs. Feel the erect position of your spinal cord. Try to visualize your sitting posture. Now slowly bring attention to what you hear, whatever sound that you could hear. And now try to identify the source of the sound. Now gently bring your attention to your breathing. Watch each inhalation and exhalation. Slow and steady, natural breathing. Feel the cool air going into your nostrils and warm air going out of your nostrils. While you are watching your breath, maintain the complete stillness of your body. With your eyes closed, shift your attention to the tip of your nose. Try to visualize the tip of your nose. Every time you move away from the tip of your nose, bring back your attention. While you are watching tip of your nose, be aware of all other thoughts that you may get. Do not struggle. Observe your thought, recognize it, and let it go. Each time you are disturbed or distracted with other thought, do the reaffirmation of bringing back your attention, of watching your tip of your nose, feeling the breath incoming and going out. Stay focused. Remember, the only task that you have while sitting completely relaxed is to watch your breath. Your entire attention is on watching the breath, your incoming and outgoing breath. slowly but surely try to hold on to the attention, your focus, your awareness. And maybe you realize that mind activity of your thoughts, number of thoughts gradually reduces. And you are able to stay focused. Slowly try to synchronize your breathing in and breathing out by chanting So Hum. With inhalation, the mental chant of So. With exhalation, mental chanting of Hum. So Hum. So Hum. That chant of So Hum, try to synchronize with every inhalation and exhalation. Slowly, you may open your eyes. Thank you so much. Over to you, Bina.
Thank you, Umesh. That was very relaxing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we are at 10:46. We should have Krishna Pani ji come in any minute. So Ravi, if Ravi is there, I'm not sure. I could have asked him to play some music.
निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा वक्रतुण्ड महाकाय सूर्यकोटि समप्रभ निर्विघ्नं मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा
Umesh ji, Umesh ji, are you there?
Yes, I'm very much there.
Acha, Umesh ji, I just wanted to ask you, did Maharishi Mahesh Yogi also practice this levitating yoga?
Binaji, they do not practice it. It happens to them.
Uh-huh.
So as I said, Babuji, after maybe 20 minutes or 15 minutes of sitting in the dhyana, people could see him moving slowly, lifting his body up, and it was almost like 3 or 3.5 feet above the floor. And it stayed there for another 20, 30 minutes. And when that got over, that Babuji started, he was out of joy, out of bliss. He was jumping on a dais like a small child. He could not, so there was no body consciousness. He did not realize that he is 70-year-old and he is not as fit enough as a young child. But that tremendous strength that he derived after the sitting in dhyana, and his body became so light. So it is possible, and it is not that they are doing it, it just happens to them.
Any other questions for Umesh? Anything on yoga, pranayam, mudras?
Yes. Just for any one of you feel like joining, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, India time at 7 o'clock in the morning, I am conducting. There are about 47 people who are enrolled, and I think about 30 of them are very regular. So, and this group is relatively new, and so I'm doing the so-called beginners and level 1.
Umesh, can you just put it on the chat, the meeting ID, or
Which one?
can you put it on the chat here?
On this chat now?
Yeah.
Let me figure out. Yes, I can give the link.
You can give the link, or you can
Yes.
give the ID, meeting ID and password, which I think is
will.
the same for all the sessions, right?
Yes.
So just give that, and then whoever's interested from the group can also join.
Okay.
Yeah. So you said 7 o'clock in the mornings, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, right?
7 a.m. to 8 a.m. India time, Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
Okay. Just share the link and password. I mean
I
the
will.
ID and password.
Yes, I will. I'll do that. Is KK back? KKG is back.
Umesh ji, is this yoga asanas, or
Yes.
are they meditations also? Do they include meditation also?
Yeah. So first 30-35 minutes is different asanas. About 15 minutes of pranayama, followed by 5 minutes of dhyana, and then ends with the chanting of Om and prayer.
Yeah. So I am back.
Thank
So,
Okay, welcome back,
Over.
Krishna Paniji. We had
Thank
a
you.
nice session with Umesh.
yeah, good. Now you might have found that to be very interesting, actually. Okay, that's good. I think maybe sometimes it is good to have an interlude.
All Soham people are interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So shall we go to the next verse? Now, another aspect is brought out in this particular verse as to what happens to a person after the upadhi or the body or the set of bodies or whatever is there is destroyed or drops off. So in this particular verse, that aspect is very beautifully illustrated with three interesting examples. Upadhi vilayad Vishnau nirvishesham vishenmunihi jale jalam vyomni tejas tejasivayatha. On the destruction of the Upadhi, Vilaya means to fall off or to merge. So when the Upadhi is merged, that means is again goes back to its elements, the Panchamahabhutas. This contemplative one, the Muni, is totally absorbed in Vishnu. Vishnu does not mean a kind of, the Vishnu we recognize or we understand Vishnu as. The root meaning of the Vishnu, of the word Vishnu, is all pervasive. That is why the Vishnu Sahasranama starts with it. Vishvam Vishnur Vashatkaraha. He is Vishwam Vishnu. He is the world and he is the one who pervades everything. And it is this all-pervading spirit which is designated by the name or the term Vishnu. And he is absorbed in that all-pervading spirit, totally losing his identity and merging without any remainder. Nirvishesham Vishen Munihi. Vishet means enters. The term Vishesha, Visha comes from that root where we normally use the term Pravesh. Pravesh means specifically entering. Vishen means entering as such. So Nirvishesham, that means totally absorbed and without any remainder, without anything unique about him, without his own identity being in any form dominating. He is merged into that all-pervading consciousness, which is designated by the term Vishnu. How? The interesting thing is Jale Jalam. Suppose you mix two waters, two glasses of water. Can you separate out and say this is from this glass and this is from this glass? Water merging in water, space merging in space, light merging in light. That means you can't distinguish, you can't separate it out, you can't have any distinction of identification when that merger happens. When that spirit is entered into after the falling off of the Upadhi. So this is what is to indicate what happens to a Jivan Mukta. A person who is liberated or who is in a state of consciousness. Kindly, I would like to repeat again and again, please do not imagine liberation, moksha, emancipation, nirvana, kaivalya. All these terms, unfortunately, are nouns. But they are not nouns, they are not things, they are not objects, they are not anything which we can understand. It is a dynamic state where there is a tremendous activity going on. It is actually a verb. It is actually a state of highest vibration, which is essentially very dynamic and which has an intrinsic order in it, an intrinsic correctness, an intrinsic excellence, an intrinsic beauty of its own. This is the point which we have to understand. So please do not understand this as some state somewhere we need to reach, something to be attained. Unfortunately, because we don't have better words, we use these words. It is the best thing is not to use any words, but then there won't be any communication at all at our level. So whatever communication, means of communication available to us now should not mislead us or create wrong impressions in our mind. That's much more important. So please do not be under the impression that when we are talking about some state of consciousness, it is something as such, or some state to be attained, or some position, or some place, or something of that nature. It is beyond space and time. So beyond the comprehension of the mind in any manner whatsoever, any amount of description will be only misleading and very limiting, very, very confusing. So they are not talking about that at all. See, yesterday when in some other group where we study Jiddu Krishnamurti talks about this and says, it is non-verbal, non-emotional, non-sentimental, non-romantic. And it is that intelligence which comes uninvited. You can't invite it. It is that perception which brings about tremendous clarity. And you experience, you in the sense, there's no individual as such to experience, but there is a state of that delight, of that joy, ecstasy, of that happiness, whatever terms you may use, it is that. And when there is a fall from that state, the same ecstasy becomes pleasure and you start pursuing it. You want more of it. That means thought has come into the whole thing. The interference of thought creates this dichotomy, creates this wedge, and creates this barrier. So let us not hold on to words in any manner whatsoever. The words are at most very weak, very limiting, and very distorting pointers. They're pointers, but at the same time, very limiting, very limited, very distorted, and misleading pointers if you do not understand them properly. The words should not form the basis of our experience at all. Last time, if you remember, in some other session, I talked about experience being stepped down to expression, that expression being extrapolated and interpreted to be something, and that extrapolated thing, somebody picking it up and then trying to project as though it is his own. All this confusion will arise when one does not have that direct and immediate experience. Again, when the words are misleading, when I say one does not have, there is no one at all there. When the experience is there, that alone is there. The one, the identity of a person is an artificially contrived mechanism of the mind, which creates this I. So let's not fall into the trap of words. Because it is very difficult even to imagine mentally what it means to be all-pervading. All-pervading. Nothing is excluded. Everything is included in its fold. The best part of it, the worst part of it, the goodness of it, the ugliness of it, the cruelty of it, the violent part of it, the peaceful part, everything is included in this whole system. So we are talking about that Brahman, One good part of the whole system is that while it is all inclusive, it is also infinite and totally unattached to it. It is not related to this manifestation in the manner we understand the relationship. Like, for example, in one of the discussions of Jiddu Krishnamurti with the world famous theoretical physicist David Bohm, in the dialogue in the book Awakening of Intelligence, he says a relationship can be something which need not have any contact point. And the beautiful mathematical example he gives is that of two parallel lines. The two parallel lines, they never meet. And that's why mathematically they say the parallel lines meet at infinity. But what is the property of parallel lines? The distance between the two lines is constant. Then only they become parallel. If the distance is not constant, they will meet at some finite point. If the distance between the two lines is constant, then only they are called as parallel and they meet at infinity. That means they never meet. If the distance is even a fraction here or there will be a point in the finite space, spatio-temporal framework where they will meet. You understand the beauty of it? Are you able to grasp the beauty of it? See, the parallel lines, there is a relationship. What is that relationship? That the distance between the two lines is constant. It is the same always, forever. That is a relationship. But is there a contact? Absolutely not. Do they touch each other anywhere? No. So a relationship can be of this nature also. That is the relationship between manifestation and unmanifest, the manifest and the unmanifest. The unmanifest is unmanifest, that's all. The manifest can never touch it. But the manifest comes into being in the presence of the unmanifest, in a way, again, using only words, and it maintains that distance. Once that is not there, the manifest and unmanifest merge, and only the unmanifest is there, nothing else is there. That is the Vishnu. That is the all-pervasive nature of that spirit. So that's why they are going on giving these examples of space in space, light in light, water in water. It means they become totally indistinguishable through that merger. And that happens in the case of a Jivan Mukta when he has dropped his body. And how does he drop? He has maybe some residual karma here and there, but nothing more which can hold him to this world. That compulsive, the cycle of birth and death, he is out of it. He is out of that compulsion. That's what is indicated here in the case of one who is a Jivan Mukta, one who is liberated. That's the beauty of it. So you have to go deeper and deeper and deeper. We have to go deeper into one's own being to actually understand the nature of this reality. To actually understand the nature of this reality. And this understanding is not mental. This understanding is intuitive. Is a flash. It comes to you and you understand the depth of it. again, I'm reminded of Ravi Ravindra when he says, understanding means standing under the benediction of that reality. We talked about grace. That's what happens. That's precisely what Jiddu Krishnamurti meant when he said that intelligence comes into operation uninvited, and it cannot come in a conditioned mind. A conditioned mind cannot touch that reality, and it cannot even approach it. It's very difficult. So that's why he says a conditioned mind cannot be intelligent. By intelligence, he means that prajna. I'm not talking about the being smart or being very quick at doing solving problems, mathematics, or answering questions. It's not that intelligence. This intelligence is that ultimate reality. And it is that intelligence which comes uninvited, which in other terms is called as Brahma. That's why we have that famous Mahavakya, Prajnanam Brahma, from the Chandogya Upanishad. So you see, one has to dwell in it actually, live in it. Move in it. One should have one's own being in it in order to come to it. Or come to it in the sense in order to prepare oneself so that as and when it comes, you are in a position to receive it. Because it comes uninvited. And very beautifully, that's why he says, only when you are utterly sensitive, when you are utterly sensitive, then the intelligence operates. Intelligence itself means to be totally, completely, utterly sensitive and attentive. That's what we are talking about. And that is something very sacred, very holy, untouched by any mind, untouched by any aspect of this limited consciousness. And it operates in a sphere which is totally, to say, out of the world, in fact, out of the universe, manifested universe. That is the, state all these verses are actually talking about. If we go simply by the translation of these verses and go word by word, they don't mean much. They won't mean much, and there could be a lot of confusion. We won't understand anything about it. I have come across all kinds of misinterpretations. The moment he uses Vishnu, somebody takes it as something belonging to a particular sect of Vaishnavites. There was a fellow, when he found the word Shiva in the Mandukya Upanishad, he said it is something belonging to the Shaivites. What nonsense they talk, what kind of distortions they spread. Because it's imprinted in our cultural collective consciousness that Shiva appears like this, Vishnu appears like this, Brahma appears like this. The symbol has become tremendously important. And the significance and the reality behind that symbol, the truth behind the symbol is lost. One should not lose that. That is what is important. Otherwise, one can never touch that consciousness at all. One can never come to it because it is our own limitation, our own ignorance, our own inability and incompetence and barriers created by our own thought that we are blocking the whole thing. So that is very important. If we before going to the next question, I think maybe if there are any points for discussion, we can take up here. Umesh has given the details in the chat. People who need it may kindly note down the ID, the password, the dates and time, days and time details. Okay. Anything to discuss? So that before I go to, because 54, 55, 56, 57, and then 60 and 61, I think, versus there are totally 68. Out of these, 54, 55, 56, 57, 60, and 61 talk about how to understand Brahman, how to actually recognize Brahman, or what is the nature of the Brahman. That is described in the next 4 verses. Then again, he talks about Tadvad Brahmet Javadharayet is the sentence or the phrase which he uses 5 or 6 times in this. I'll come to it maybe next time, in the next class. If there is anything to be discussed, kindly you may raise the point or question, we will discuss. Umeshji?
There is one point, sir.
Yes, sir. Tell me.
You mentioned today and earlier as well about the ether, the Akasha Tattva.
Yes.
Now the Akasha is part of the manifestation, and therefore 3 gunas are attached to it. Is that correct?
Yes and no. There is a primordial Akasha, or I would rather identify that with the all-pervading consciousness, which is prior to Prakriti in manifestation. That is, it is Avyakta Prakriti. There is a Chit Shakti in manifestation, and there is a potential form of that Chit Shakti in the unmanifest, which is by itself all pervasive, and there is nothing to identify it. So Akasha is a tattva which comes into being in manifestation, but which has its roots in the unmanifest. Akasha is the first tattva. And as you rightly mentioned, it has these 3 gunas also. If you remember what we did in the Tattva Bodha, the whole Jagat, the whole manifestation process is defined there by saying that from the Sattvikamsha of the Akasha, the Jnanendra in association with the Tanmatras and the subtler forms of the Panchamahabhutas. So you see, in one way, Akasha is associated with the 3 gunas. But in another manner, Akasha is such a difficult tattva to visualize and understand, because its basis is consciousness. Its basis or its foundation is consciousness. And consciousness is something which is uniform, all-pervading energy. When it comes to manifestation, it will manifest in some form of energy. But in the unmanifest, it's where its roots are there, where its foundation is there, where its basis is there. There, it is nothing but Shuddha Chaitanya. It is nothing but pure consciousness, which is in a way, that's why it is called as something unidentifiable.
So,
That is where the Mandukya Upanishad, the definition comes.
so when it is that element of Akasha, when it is an unmanifested state,
It's
it
not
is
Akasha
nothing
as
but-
such. It is not,
It
you
is-
can't really call it as Akasha at that state.
Ah,
That's why I
correct.
called
That's
it as
nothing but a
pure
consciousness,
pure
a
consciousness.
pure consciousness.
Yeah. That's what it is. It is that uniform, all-pervading, infinite, or infinity, where there is absolutely no movement as we understand here. In that,
Okay.
when a movement begins, Akasha is born and the germ of manifestation is born. Maybe you can do one small thing, Umeshji.
Haji.
Just Google
Yeah.
The Secret Doctrine.
Yes.
The Secret Doctrine,
Yes.
if you Google it
Yes.
and go to the very first page,
Yes.
very first page of the Secret Doctrine,
Yes.
it gives a beautiful description. It's only a description again. Don't take it as don't take it as the truth or something.
Mm.
Because it's only a very beautiful way of mentioning it. Because something which is which you can't even imagine,
Yeah.
which you can't even visualize in any form, is being defined here, is being expressed in words. As I said, the words have their own limitation, isn't it? It has its own limitation. I'm trying to locate that for you.
I found I'm reading it now on PDF
Yeah.
file. Google,
Yeah.
the
You
first
go-
page.
You go to the actual thing after the introduction. After the introduction, don't get
After
stuck by
after the preliminary note.
Yeah, 7 stanzas from the books of Jnana.
Okay.
Here, I'll read it out.
Okay.
The eternal parent, wrapped in her ever invisible robes, had slumbered once again for 7 eternities. Time was not, for it lay asleep in the infinite bosom of duration. Universal mind was not, for there were no ahi to contain it. The 7 ways to bliss were not, the great causes of misery were not, for there was no one to produce and get ensnared by them. Darkness alone filled the boundless all, for father, mother, and son were once more one. and the sun had not yet awakened for the new wheel and his pilgrimage thereon. The seven sublime lords and the seven truths had ceased to be, and the universe, the sun of necessity, was immersed in Paranishpanna, to be outbreathed by that which is and yet is not was. The causes of existence had been done away with. The visible that was and the invisible that is rested in eternal non-being, the one being. Alone, the one form of existence stretched boundless, infinite, causeless in dreamless sleep, and life pulsated unconscious in universal space throughout that all presence, which is sensed by the opened eye of the Dhamma. But where was Dhamma when the alaya of the universe was in Paramartha and the great wheel was Anupadaka? It goes on very beautifully. And finally, he says, she says, the hour had not yet struck, the ray has not yet flashed into the germ, the Matru Padma had not yet swollen. Then she says, these two are the germ, and the germ is one. The universe was still concealed in the divine thought and the divine bosom. Then the last vibration of the seventh eternity thrills through infinitude. The mother swells, expanding from within without like the bud of the lotus. The vibration sweeps along, touching with it its swift wing, the whole universe and the germ that dwelleth in darkness, the darkness that breathes out the slumbering waters of life. From there, this whole thing, the world egg, the Brahmanda is born. This is a beautiful, see, these stanzas, read them, read these seven stanzas without commentary first.
Yeah.
And see the poetic beauty of it. Similarly, you can go to Savitri. You can go to Savitri by Aurobindo. Savitri by Aurobindo is called a legend and a symbol. Huh? If you see that also, the beginning of it, the beginning of it will be just like what I have read out to you now. Huh? You see, they struggled a lot. They struggled a lot to somehow communicate something which is which can't be communicated at all. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. But
So,
the point is, now the Akasha that we talk generally during our, in context with what we are studying, is only about the manifestation part of Akasha. Am I correct?
Yes. Yes. In a way.
And this is not pure sattva, neither pure sattva nor pure rajasic or tamasic. It's combination.
Yeah, so see, the point I am trying to make is, don't try to understand too much about Akasha. You will not get the kind of clarity you are looking for, because what happens here is, the tattva is so subtle that it is indistinguishable at one point, and from that comes the whole of manifestation. Because from Akasha comes Shabda. Nada becomes Shabda. The voice, this voice of the silence is Nada. That means the soundless sound. The soundless sound becomes Shabda. It becomes actual sound, actual word. That is the beauty of that. See, the Gospel according to St. John also starts that way. The word logos means word, W-O-R-D.
Yeah.
And therefore, actually, the Latin and Greek and the Roman, this thing, they use this term logos, which is translated as the word. And the beginning of that, the Gospel according to St. John says, in the beginning was the word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
Mm. Mm.
So there is so much of allegory, symbolism, and hidden meaning. Similarly, coming to Aurobindo, Aurobindo, Savitri, the symbol, dawn,
Yeah.
first canto.
Mm.
It was the hour before the gods awake. Across the path of the divine event, the huge foreboding mind of night alone in her unlit temple of eternity lay stretched immobile upon silence marge. Almost one felt opaque, impenetrable in the somber symbol of her eyeless muse, the abysm of the unbodied infinite. A fathomless zero occupied the world, a power of fallen boundless self awake between the first and the last nothingness, recalling the tenebrous womb from which it came, turned from the insoluble mystery of birth and the tardy process of mortality, and longed to reach its end in vacant naught. As in a darkness beginning of all things, a mute, featureless semblance of the unknown, repeating forever the unconscious act. It goes on and on. See, we can't really make out anything unless you have an intuitive sensitivity to it.
True. Very true. True.
Unless you become intuitively sensitive to it, all that appears as क्या तो भी लिखा है, क्या बोल रहा है, क्या सब कुछ
Very poetic. Mm.
very poetic, but at the same time, all gibberish.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really doesn't mean anything. They are all contradictory. All mutually contradictory terms are used.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
That's what it is actually, because your mind can't fathom it. So the
There is,
Akasha, in coming back to your question, the Akasha in manifestation is also a difficult tattva to recognize because it is intangible, unlike the other. That is why most of the other cultures and civilizations have only earth, water, fire, and air. That's all. Except the Indic civilization, the great civilization born in these plains of the Himalayas and the Ganges, Ganga. You don't find anywhere this, they never touched upon the Akasha Tattva because they found that it is impossible. There is some mention in Greek, by Greek philosophers as ether, as the medium, and so many other things have been said, but they never recognized it as the most fundamental, independent tattva from which everything else flows. Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Right. Okay then. So thank you very much. It's already 11:30. We will, Sajini ji is there or Sumanji is there anyway. Can you do Loka Samasta, Sumanji? And we can close it.
Yeah, actually I'm outside.
Okay, I'll do it. I'll do it, no problem. Om Swasti Prajabhyah Paripalayantam Nyayena Markena Mahim Mahishaha Gobrahmanebhyah Shubhamastu Nityam Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat Brahmarpanamastu. Harihi Om. Sri Krishna Arpanamastu. Thank you. As usual, the School of Ancient Wisdom programs will be there. Unfortunately, Beena ji and Sajini ji are not there, but you will anyway get them on the chat in the WhatsApp. Thank you so much.